All right, there we go.
Okay, so we're wondering about the chemistry of cosmetics here. So I'll just show you how little I know. I'm going to do my little experiment here. If I take some of this, I think I can make my own product. Pour some in here. Ooh, I think that's about right. Let's see. Let's try this and pour this in here.
What you got there?
It's something that will make it bubble.
Whoa.
Oh, okay. So that was baking soda and vinegar.
Don't drink that.
No, don't drink
Good,
that, and
but
don't put it on your face. You can maybe put it down your drain, depending on what kind of pipes you have, right?
yeah.
Well, all righty there. It is obvious. I am not a cosmetic chemist.
But you look like one with the gloves and the glasses.
Yeah, I can dress the part, can't I? But that's why I have real cosmetic chemists on. Welcome to Happy Skin Over 50. Guest today is Valerie George, and she's a cosmetic chemist. Oh my goodness, a science communicator. She's an educator, and she's a leader and avid proponent of transparency. We like that in the beauty industry. Welcome, Valerie George.
Thanks for having me.
I am so glad that you're here. We're going to do this in two parts because there's just so much to say and do and think about in the cosmetic. I need to tip my experiment over there so it doesn't get on my MacBook over there. In the cosmetic industry, because lots of times, and I have seen this so many times, and I was guilty of it myself, start into esthetician school and it's, oh, I'm going to make my own products. I know what to do and make my own products. And then we get into esthetician school and then realize, ooh, yikes, we start reading the ingredient label. One of the things, and this is hot topic and has been for several years, and I don't see it nosediving anytime soon. Valerie, is the topic or subject or of I want chemical free. Anything you put on anything, I want chemical free. Well, let's say air is, water is. I'm going to just turn it over to you now. Can you speak on chemical free?
Yeah, it's impossible to do because everything that we interact with is considered a chemical. We're made of chemicals. We're made of atoms. We're made of the smallest units that a chemical could be made of. So chemical free is impossible. And I think from the earliest exposure to chemistry that we have in school, we're taught that chemicals are dangerous. Chemicals are, can be hazardous. There's risk being around chemicals. And so we have ingrained in us, chemicals require safety. Maybe they're not meant to be on our skin. We're supposed to use gloves when we interact with them. And, we're taught by people on the internet that if you can't pronounce something, should you be eating it? Should you be putting it on your skin? Chemicals are horrible, but at the end of the day, chemicals are great. They're how we have good looking skin. They're how we are able to exfoliate. They're how we're able to have modern medicine even. So chemicals really are a good thing. And it's okay if you don't understand all the subtle nuances of everything that's in your product. You just have to know that cosmetics are safe. They're legally required to be safe. And it's okay to use things with chemicals in them because everything's a chemical.
Is there anything that differentiates a safer chemical from an unsafe chemical, or does it depend on the use?
It depends on what the ingredient is, the level that it's used at, the way that it's used, the way that you're putting it on your body. So there's a difference between hazard and risk. Chemicals can be hazardous, but is there a risk in being exposed to them in the way that you're being exposed to them? And in cosmetic science, the person that evaluates that scenario is a toxicologist. So a toxicologist will look at an ingredient or look at a formula and look at the way it's being used. So is it being put on the face? Is it being put on the body? Is it being put on once a day, twice a day, rinsed off, all that kind of stuff. And they'll determine whether or not there is an actual risk in being exposed to those ingredients in that way in that product. So from that sense, yes, we do look at the way that it's being used, the percentage, the application, and we're able to determine whether or not the product is safe to be used. And if it's not safe, you have to reformulate it. And if the toxicologist says no problems here, it's ready to go to market.
Are you a toxicologist also? Is that?
I'm not a toxicologist. So a toxicologist is someone who's certified. They have either a medical degree or other types of training that allow them to properly look at the margin of safety that an ingredient has. So no, I'm not a toxicologist, but I do know a little bit about toxicology. I do know about ingredients and ingredient safety and which ingredients have which restrictions. It's something that you get over experience.
Now the restrictions, would the restrictions be like, so something that you can use on a mature adult and not use on a baby? Or is it a restriction like you can't use these chemicals with these chemicals? Or
It's both of them. It's both of them. Yeah. So certain ingredients have known use levels. So generally toxicologists don't like to see a certain ingredient being used a certain way over a certain level. And sometimes it can be a geographical restriction. So in Japan, they don't like a certain ingredient over a certain use level, but in the EU or the US or Canada, that restriction isn't there. It could be sometimes where I've used an ingredient at a certain level, but that ingredient no longer exists. It's been chemically converted. And so you have the conversation with the toxicologist about that. It's very complex, but basically, yeah, a restriction can be anything. It can be the way it's used, the use level it's used, the format you used it in. Some products you shouldn't leave on the skin. They need to be rinsed off, or ingredients, I should say. And then some ingredients have bad interactions and you're not supposed to use certain ingredient types in combination.
now this is something that I learned way back when, I guess in postgraduate in college or something, that it 23 to 26 seconds, something can be assimilated transdermally, which for our audience means soak into the skin, soak through the skin,
Yeah.
and go into the bloodstream and lymphatic system. Is that correct?
No, I think that's, I don't know where that number came from. I haven't heard of it. I think that's a generalization, if at best, for sure, because lots of factors determine whether or not an ingredient can penetrate into the skin, for sure, if at all. So from a cosmetics perspective, things are supposed to go into the skin, and that's really where they're supposed to be. There's lots of ingredients that you can't get into the skin for anything. And there's a lot of technology being developed about how to deliver ingredients better into the skin. You can use penetration enhancers. You can use ingredients that are maybe put into phospholipid vesicles to try to get them in. Some penetrate more readily. The format of the formula can make a big difference on whether or not. So when you have a cream that looks white, that's called an emulsion. It's a mixture of oil and water. And the type of emulsion you have can determine the ability of ingredients to penetrate into the skin or sit topically. So I think it's a really complex subject, and to give something a time point and assume that everything goes in or some things go in, it's really hard to do.
We're deviating from the cosmetic industry a little bit with this question, and you may be able to answer it, may not. But for example, the patches, like for air sickness, nicotine patches, hormone patches. Does that have a follicle, a delivery system built in, or is it the actual chemical medication?
I think it depends on what it is. So in the case of nicotine can cross skin into the blood. It does it better when it has a specific delivery system, such as a patch that has microneedles. Maybe there's additional chemicals tied into the patch that help facilitate diffusion into the skin to deliver a specified amount of drug. You can also find the same thing with acne patches. They have a similar type mechanism where they have these they're different technologies, but basically they have something about the patch, and the formula helps facilitate diffusion into skin better.
But it has little needles or something, right?
That's what some of the manufacturers say.
But not
Yeah.
all of them, or
Not all of them. There's different technologies available. I'm not super well versed in them. I only know about them from interacting with the vendors,
yeah.
but some of them have their own proprietary technologies. But I think the concept is the same. They have some type of needle type system that helps deliver it into the skin.
Well, we were talking about safety.
Yeah.
And it we've got something in the news recently. Of course, this is going to be out. YouTube is forever, so it's going to be out forever, but we're in 2022. But there was a recent recall on some cosmetic or hair care products.
Okay.
Who determines the recall? What happens? What is that process?
Yeah. So the FDA can ask the brand to initiate a recall if they feel the product is not safe. So in the United States and Canada, for the most part, and really around the world, the law is cosmetic products have to be safe. They can't be adulterated with ingredients that are not supposed to be in there, or contaminants that are not supposed to be in there. And whatever the product is labeled and says it does has to be true. So those are like the basic rules. So when a product violates those regulations, the brand has an obligation to recall them from the market, but the FDA can't force you to. They can just say you're in violation and you need to recall the product. We're recommending you recall the product from the market. And whether or not the brand does that is really up to the brand. So when a brand does publicly announce a recall, I think it's really cool because stuff happens, mistakes happen, things happen in manufacturing. Some are in your control, but maybe you couldn't help or you weren't aware of, or some things are just out of your control. Stuff happens. Manufacturing is very hard. So when a brand does a recall, I'm like, wow, that's really cool. You know that there's an issue, and you're asking people to send the product back, or to dispose of the product, or stop using it. And usually when that happens, you're taking some kind of corrective action so that that doesn't happen in the future.
So then it's kudos to the company.
Yeah. Yeah, there are some brands that
manufactures the product.
Yeah, there are some brands that don't do recalls because they're embarrassed, or they're concerned that there's going to be a negative reputation, or point out that they're not doing things correctly. And obviously that's not a good thing. And but that's a choice that the brand makes when they choose to not recall something.
Is there a list or a resource to find who the FDA has recommended recall, or no, and they didn't do it?
Well, the FDA publishes who is making a recall, because the brand will notify the FDA, we're recalling this product. The FDA will put out an alert, and it's not just for cosmetics, it's for food, drug, supplement, all that kind of stuff. So if you're not subscribed, I definitely recommend subscribing to this email list. That's how you'll get all the alerts for when they happen. But it'll get published on the FDA website. The FDA will publish a notice and say this company's recalling. Usually the news outlets pick it up. In terms of brands that should be doing recalls that aren't, there's no real way to get that list. However, the FDA will publish warning letters to brands on the internet. Those are public information as well. So the FDA will conduct an audit of a brand or a manufacturing facility and say, you're not really meeting the obligations of what your product should be, or of what your manufacturing facility should be according to our good manufacturing practices, or whatever the issue is. And they'll publish warning letters that the brands or manufacturing facilities have to respond to and show that they're doing corrective action. Not all warning letters get published. The big ones do, I would say. but you can get those sometimes. And those are also available on the FDA website. They're fun to read.
Okay, so if somebody subscribes to your newsletter, or is there going to be a link in that? And can you lead to that, or just need to go to the FDA?
It's the FDA website. You can sign up for it to be notified when recalls are posted.
Oh, okay. Oh,
Yeah, sometimes we talk about them on the Beauty Brains podcast
yeah.
that I co-host, but we call it Recall Corner, and we'll address some of the latest recalls that pop up, but not always, because some of them are repeat offenders, where they have another bacterial contamination or whatnot. But we tend to talk about most of them.
Well, I suggest that you, in the description, and this is for our viewing audience, and this is going to be on podcast later too. So if you're listening to this, then in the description, there are going to be links for you to be in contact with Valerie George, the cosmetic chemist, who is our guest today, because she has several different platforms that I'm sure you'll be interested in. So sign up for those, follow those links and sign up for those. Now, one time, many years ago, maybe when my children were really young and small, I did sign up for that list to get recall. And my email was flooded daily with recalls, because it was recalls on tires and
Yeah, they publish everything.
everything. It's like, yeah, okay.
Now I feel like you can drill it down.
Okay, and okay. That was quite a while ago. So that would
Yeah. And two, I have just a reminder, just because I get a lot of emails in general and I'm always trying to turn them off, get less emails. But I have a little reminder that I set to myself, and I'll go to the FDA website and see what's, but you could do that too.
yeah, but that's
And
a good
manual.
idea.
Yeah. It's like my monthly notice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then I can be in control of it instead of just receiving a bunch of stuff. And then I know that this is something that I do occasionally. You mentioned the EU, which is European Union, for any of our audience that's not aware of that, because what we hear so much of too, and I wanted, if you would touch on that, people will say there's a difference in, these are by European standards, so it is superior than the standards of the United States or Canada. I've always called it North America, but the ones that because when I did a little bit of research on it one time and taught a little webinar on it to esthetician students, the things that in the United States that were not listed, that were listed on the EU's products that, not used, were things like gasoline and kerosene.
Yeah.
Things that it's like, well, common sense is going to tell you should not use gasoline or something. However, just I think yesterday I saw a post on an esthetician group that somebody said, post the worst things that your clients used on their face, and someone had mentioned gasoline.
Oh my gosh.
And it's like, oh, I didn't. Okay.
Well,
so can you kind of discuss the EU to the US and Canada?
Sure. Yeah. So they both have the same regulations in that cosmetics are required to be safe. Whatever you say is in the product and whatever you say the product does has to be true. And the product has to be labeled for the consumer to understand what they're purchasing, what the directions of use are, and what the wordings are before they buy the product. Those are the same rules in the US, Canada, European Union, and for the most part, the rest of the world. How the US and EU, so we'll say North America and EU differ, is that the EU requires pre-market approval before you can start selling your product, whereas in the United States and Canada, you don't need pre-market approval to sell it. So for example, Jill, you want to create your own cosmetic product in the United States. You're allowed to create it. You have to make sure that it's safe to be used. You have to make sure that the product is labeled appropriately, and then you're allowed to start selling it. There's no one to tell you you can or can't do that. In the EU, you have to show the product to somebody, a toxicologist. They have to go through the product and say, I think it's safe to be sold. And you have to have a responsible person who takes legal responsibility for that product on the market. And if someone has an adverse reaction, gets irritated, something like that, the responsible person is legally and criminally responsible for that product, should the product not be safe or not be labeled in a fair way. So really, the end result is the same. How you get there is different. And so people will say, well, the EU is safer because they have a list of 1,400 plus ingredients that you're not allowed to use, which, by the way, 99.5% of them, which is, it's an estimate, you would never use in cosmetics anyway. They have very specific lists of what you're allowed to use for colorants, what you're allowed to use for preservatives. It's just how you get there is very laid out and structured. Whereas in the US, it's really up to Jill, you, the brand, to say, okay, what test do I do to determine if the product is safe or not? And, am I using ingredients that are toxicologically sound? It's up to you to determine how to get there. And if someone has an incident, they have to take it up with you as the brand. And so in the US, people feel that it's less safe because it's less structured to get to that safety point. But at the end of the day, the responsibility is on the brand and not the government to determine that. So that's really the difference.
Excuse me, is that something that you do if someone says, I want to manufacture these are my ideas of what I want?
Yeah.
They don't come like that, but here's my list, and they're probably not using the compound table or anything. But
Yeah.
what do you do then? Do you work for individuals, or do you work for the larger companies?
Yeah. So I used to work at a very large corporation, and I was their executive vice president of R&D and regulatory. I also oversaw quality and manufacturing. So I knew all the things that are required, not just in the US, but many geographies to get a product to market and be compliant. And now I work for myself. I have two companies. One is called Simply Formulas, and I'm a lab. I have a lab, and I just make products for different brands, whether they're established brands or new brands looking to come to market. Or maybe it's an esthetician like yourself who says, I would just like one product. And basically I formulate it for them. I, at the end, I run it through a toxicologist. Not all cosmetic chemists or formulators do that, but I have a toxicologist I use to validate my work. And I advise you of the safety testing that you need to conduct as the brand to bring it to market. And so whether you do it or not is up to you. There's some minimal ones that I do, but I just basically advise on what you have to do because it's expensive, and I'll conduct it sometimes, but ultimately, the brand's responsible for paying for that. My other company is Simply Ingredients, and I sell ingredients to small brands and home crafters who want to make their own products. And I also provide educational resources for them.
And we have links to those for Valerie George in the description. So,
yeah.
Yeah. So do you have classes? Do you host classes or webinars or?
It's something I'm working on. I always think like, I got to put together something because making your own products is really fun. It's a lot of fun. And I also think it gives people an appreciation and understanding of what companies who bring products to market are doing, because it can be difficult. There's some products that are really simple to do, like facial oils and that kind of stuff. And some of the more complex products, the more technical ingredients you use or the more incompatible ingredients you use, takes a bit of knowledge, and there's a lot of science behind skincare products for sure, especially when you want to make really effective ones that give an instant result, maybe salon, or spa professional products. A lot of research is going into it.
Unmute myself. I had sent you a list. I'm not sure if you got it or not.
Yeah.
Of some ingredients. This one, body contouring, seems to be such a hot topic right now.
Yeah.
And in some states, anyone can do it. And in some states, estheticians can do it, some only massage therapists, and some.
Oh, wow. Oh, cool.
Nobody can do it. But there are some ingredients that to me, some are very familiar. A few. Yeah. And then one really is not. And it's the theophylline.
Theophylline, yeah.
What's its purpose? What does that do?
Yeah, so this is actually a naturally occurring compound that can be found in white tea and green tea. It is, I made a note just on the chemical, I can't remember all the chemical names myself, but it's a methylxanthine, which is a class of compounds found in these tea products in very tiny amounts. So don't think that you can go drink a ton of green tea or white tea and get yourself slimmer, although I'm sure a news outlet would pick that up. Like, did you know white tea makes you slimmer? And then it's like, So it's found in really tiny amounts in these tea products, just like you would find caffeine. Caffeine is a similar type compound. And in cosmetics, topically, it is found to have some, we'll call them anti-slimming properties, but really the brands that are, or excuse me, the manufacturers that are selling these types of compounds recommend them for cellulite reduction.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're
Yeah.
like, so, and then you had mentioned caffeine. Caffeine is another one that's in
Yeah.
there. And capsaicin, that's how I pronounce it. Am I pronouncing it right? The pepper.
Yeah, capsaicin, yeah. But going back to the theophylline and
Yeah.
the caffeine, there's another one called theobromine that's also found in tea, and you can actually get synergistic blends of caffeine, theophylline, and theobromine together because they think they work synergistically to help reduce fat. So caffeine, we know, increases circulation, which is really important. And then the theophylline and theobromine interact with receptors that in adipose tissue, which is our fat tissue, and it interacts with these receptors and tells it to start breaking the fat or releasing the fat from the tissue. And so you may get a temporary reduced appearance of cellulite by doing that.
Can we break this down? I don't, is this Latin or Greek or what? The words bromine.
Yeah.
That is the end of several
Yeah, well, bromine is
products.
just it's a chemical element on our periodic table. And so this compound, I don't know the specific, we can look up the chemical structure. Yeah, no, this actually doesn't contain a bromine molecule, but it actually is probably more of like a common name that came into light some taste or some way somehow. And actually, theobromine, while it's found in white tea, it's also found in cocoa, which is why sometimes people
Yes.
say cocoa has like anti-cellulite type properties. It's from that compound.
Yes. And then the red algae, rhodisterol. Is that the right pronunciation?
Yeah, so rhodosterol is actually what we
Rhodisterol.
call a trade name. So it's not a chemical name, like theophylline or capsaicin, which is found in the chili peppers, which also increases circulation. But rhodosterol is actually like a marketing name that someone gave to a compound that they have. So they've taken a red algae extract and they've made it oil soluble. So extracts are usually water soluble. They go in water or they go in oil and they're oil soluble. And this is important because compounds like theophylline, they are either water soluble or oil soluble, right? And that's important to how they function. And so if you take a vitamin D supplement, vitamin D is an oil soluble vitamin. If you're not taking it with fatty foods, you're likely not going to be taking a lot of the vitamin into your body, right? Because it's oil soluble. So it's the same with these types of extracts. So the rhodosterol is a red algae extract that a certain supplier sells. It's an oil soluble extract, and they have done studies on this extract. The supplier has, the manufacturer of it, and they say that it increases lipolysis activity, which is breaking up of fat molecules in the skin. So they're purporting it to have some anti-cellulite activity as well. So they're also saying it helps decrease the amount of fat storage you have. And they're also saying it helps increase circulation. So it's interesting, all these ingredients we've seen so far either interact with the fat or they increase blood circulation, which will help increase drainage as well. It's interesting that they all sort of have this activity. if that makes sense.
It makes sense to me. I understand that. Thank you for breaking
Yeah.
it down into layman's terms so that we can
Yeah.
understand
And
what
by
it
the
is.
way, it wouldn't be all red algae extracts that do this, but it's the specific red algae extract from this supplier where they're getting these specific compounds out of it. So you wouldn't be able to, because red algae extract is very versatile. It's used in a lot of ways. In skincare, there's a lot of valuable compounds coming out of it. But the rhodosterol is a specific oil soluble component from the red algae extract. So you would have to almost look for that trade name that the brand is calling out.
Okay, there's red algae. I know there are many different colors of algae. I'm more
Yeah.
familiar with the different colors of seaweed. Is
Yeah.
algae a seaweed or is that something different? Because I know there's red, black, green,
Yeah.
white, I think.
I think it's different, but it depends on the species. So when people say red algae extract or, red algae or brown algae or, whatever, there's many different types of species. And so the specific species in the rhodosterol extract is Galidium cartilaginum. So we can put that maybe in your show notes for what people should be looking for, but that's the specific species they've extracted from. But there's many red algae extract species.
Are these things like the algae, are they farmed or is it from natural occurrence in big bodies of water? I guess the ocean or the sea.
That's a great question. I think it could be both. So some seaweed extracts, the seaweed actually does come from the ocean, and other times it is done like in a tank. So they'll be growing this algae or plankton or seaweed in a tank, and they'll be extracting from the algae that they're growing. So in a way, I guess that's like biotech farming. It could also be isolated to an enclosed body of water, and they're isolating the plant material or ocean material, water material from there. So it can be produced in quite a bit of different ways.
And what is marine collagen? There are so many things now, it seems like the past several years. Oh, this contains marine collagen.
Yeah,
Where does
it
that come
comes
from?
from different animals from the
Oh,
sea. So that also could be farmed. But basically they're saying it's coming from an animal, in the sea. It wouldn't be a vegan product.
that it wouldn't be a vegan.
Yeah, so it's the same as like using beef collagen, which by the way, they used to use beef derived collagen in skincare. It's fantastic for skin, but people don't want to use that anymore.
Yes. If you watch some of the homesteader shows that have
Yeah.
nothing to do with cosmetic chemistry, a lot of them will have jars of beef taro, taro,
Tallow.
tallow. It's
Yeah, tallow-based skincare is
yeah,
making a
beef
huge
tallow.
comeback.
Yeah, that's
It's
not on my
also
notes.
very,
We really weren't going to talk about that today.
yeah, that's okay. Tallow is also great for skin. And I always say that using tallow in skincare, hair care is the original upcycling. People are very big into upcycled ingredients right now where they're taking waste products and using
Yes.
skincare. But I mean, for hundreds, if not really actually thousands of years, we've used tallow in skincare. It's excellent for the skin. The triglycerides and fatty acids present in it are excellent. But people don't like to use it because it's, part of the meat industry, but cows aren't being killed for skincare. The tallow that's coming from them is really a byproduct of the meat eating industry. So, I always say if you're willing to eat hamburger or steak, you shouldn't be opposed to tallow in your skincare because it's really using as much of the animal as possible. It's not a popular thing that people like to hear, but
It's a fact.
it's a fact.
Yeah, it's a fact. Then, that leads me to thinking then, I keep going down these rabbit holes. Shea butter. Where does that come from? What is that?
Shea butter comes from a shea nut or kernel in the wild in Africa. That's where it's cultivated. It's usually a wild shrub, and usually women with their children go out into these areas where shea trees grow. They're like little, tree bushes, and they'll collect the kernels that have fallen on the ground. They take them back to these collection sites, and then these kernels are crushed for the fatty butter that's inside, and that's shea butter.
you had mentioned vitamin D or D3 or something earlier too. It's kind of leading me down to another question that I had that I wanted to ask about today. I know on vitamin E, we're talking about vitamin E, we're moved from vitamin D. There's a alpha and delta, or there's a full spectrum in
Yeah.
vitamin E in the cosmetic industry,
Yeah.
right? Can you expound on that a little bit? Explain
Yeah. So,
difference in alpha and delta or full spectrum.
well, really, vitamin E, tocopherol is a naturally occurring substance in plant materials, is usually where they come from. And it's usually also synthetically produced as well. Depending on the plant species, you might have alpha tocopherol, gamma tocopherol, delta tocopherol, which is delta vitamin E. Depending on the species, you usually get like a mixture of all of those products. And so some are really high in alpha, some are really high in delta, et cetera. In as a cosmetic chemist, I should say, when I'm looking to use tocopherol as an antioxidant to stabilize a formula, I'm primarily using delta tocopherol. That's usually the one that I'm reaching for because I think it's the best at stabilizing different oils from oxidation. I also think it's primarily the most widely and effective used one, and that's why it's that one. It's probably also the most easily to synthesize, since again, a lot of them are synthetic. But yeah, that's really the story behind that. So primarily, if you see tocopherol on an ingredient list, that's vitamin E, and it's usually the delta format. But if you're using a plant oil, it may be high in alpha, it may be high in gamma, it may be have a tiny bit of delta. It just depends on the plant species.
Well, in the delta or tocopherol, then is it missing some molecules
Oh, what do you
that
mean
the
missing?
other would have? Would
Um,
be how, what makes it different? If look, is it on a compound table? I don't even know that. But
yeah, I would say the difference between them is likely the ability or the yeah, I guess I would say the ability or the efficacy in which it can prevent free radicals from floating around. And so that's what I mean when I say the delta tocopherol like probably works the best. It's the most efficacious. It has the most antioxidant potential, whereas A might have a little bit less. I don't know that for sure. I've actually tried to research this quite a bit. And I've talked to some oil chemists because when I sell an oil through my website, Simply Ingredients, I do get it tested for fatty acid profile and, how many free radicals are in the oil I'm purchasing, because some oils are more prone to rancidity than others. They oxidize very easily. And so I'll also get a breakdown of the different vitamin E's that are present, and some just have higher than others. And there's not necessarily a link to the quality of the oil, but it's just interesting, which ones are present in other species over others.
there's a CBD for the past couple of years now has been all up and down, and then all over the place. Um, Talking about broad spectrum, then water
Yeah.
soluble broad spectrum CBD, is that something that's different in different what extractions of CBD? Or
Yeah.
I don't know that I'm asking the question right. Do you?
Yeah. So CBD is short for cannabidiol, and it's typically a very oily compound. When you touch pure CBD, it's kind of it almost looks like just a pile of waxy stuff. Um, it's not a really pretty ingredient, and to dissolve it and to break this mushy stuff down, you would put it into oil or a butter, and you would dissolve it that way. It's not water soluble, but in skincare products or maybe even serums that are water-based, people are saying, hey, I'd love to use this CBD, but it's not going in, it's water's destabilizing it, whatever the case is. And so I think producers of cannabidiol are processing the CBD in a way to make it water soluble. So it's either been reacted or blended with other items to allow you to be able to put it in water-based materials without it separating or prematurely degrading.
So then it would be absorbable or
Um,
not, or
I don't
if it's
know.
just a cute marketing gimmick.
Yeah, I don't know that it's a gimmick. I think it's more speaks to the way in which the CBD got into the formula. I'm not super well versed on CBD and whether or not water soluble is more efficacious over non. I think, again, it goes back to what we talked about at the beginning of this episode, that it really depends on the format of the formula, what else is present. Is the emulsion that it's in helping facilitate penetration? Are there things that are impeding penetration? I think it's probably not so straightforward on whether water soluble or not is better for uptake. I think it's probably a complex topic, I would guess.
Yeah, it is a complex topic.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, CBD is very tricky to work with. That's what I do know.
And then what about Yara oil? Yara. I know there's a YARROW. That's two different things, right?
Yeah, I have not heard of Yara oil. I tried to look it up and it looked like a finished product.
Oh,
I
okay.
couldn't find like an actual oil on its own. And what's interesting is, with the producer of this oil, they call it Yara oil, nurturing face oil, but it's actually just a blend of other oils that they've put together, like jojoba, squalane. Jojoba oil is actually not an oil, it's a liquid wax, but squalane is also not an oil. It's a very specific material. And then they have argan oil, rosehip oil, sweet almond oil, and then they've scented it with peppermint oil and tangerine oil, and then they've added vitamin D to it. But I couldn't find, there's a brand called Yara oil, but again, I couldn't find a specific plant oil
Okay.
for this, unless, again, Yara oil is a common name for yarrow oil, and it's like a play on
Yes. Okay. Well, somebody had
words.
asked me about it, but it was in writing and it was, they sent a link thing and it was spelled YRA. Otherwise, I would think if someone just called me and said, well, would you ask the cosmetic chemist about this? Then
Yeah,
I
it's
would have said,
either,
well, it's my mistake for thinking that it said Yarrow. So this was just
it
a
could be
question we had.
just the Wicked Skincare's, I know we don't want to talk brands. It could be their product. It could be yarrow oil, which is an essential oil. It's actually not like a fatty plant oil.
Yeah.
It could be a bunch of those things, but I think it's maybe probably the essential oil.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then I sent you a link or a list of other things, and I'm not going to even try to pronounce them. Can you tell us a little bit about what they are? And also, it does, when the general consumer or the professional is looking at an ingredient list, it's
Yeah.
not necessarily, it's not alphabetized, and it's not necessarily in the strongest, most efficient, provide the most saturation, efficacy of a product. It's not in line that way, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So pretty much no matter where you're at in the world, the predominant ingredients in the formula have to be listed in descending concentration order. So for example, you sent me an ingredient list for a serum type product, I'm guessing, and it starts with aloe barbadensis leaf juice and then goes to hydroxyalpha cellulose, then 5% lactic acid and mandelic acid, 4%. And it continues to list other ingredients. Anything above 1% has to be listed in descending order. So that's why they listed lactic acid at 5% and then mandelic acid at 4%. Anything before those ingredients would have to be 5% or higher. Now, anything 1% or less does not have to be listed in percentage order. It has to be
Okay.
listed in any order you want. Some people just choose to list alphabetical. Most companies say, what ingredient is less than 1% that we want to make it look like is higher? And then they'll put it in that type of order. Usually, incidental ingredients like preservatives or chelating agents or pH adjusting agents. Everyone knows they're not used at a significant level. And so they'll put those at the bottom. Colorants are usually listed last. People like to list their fragrance allergens last because people know that they're tiny percentages. So a brand will try to list it in a way where the competitor can't really figure out what they did. So that's how they get listed. But anything that's in random order is below, usually below 1%. And that's up to the discretion of the brand.
Okay, so they're not putting a proprietary formula on their bottle of their ingredient, are they?
No, no. And most people, I mean, some depending on this type of ingredient. So for example, people always want to know what percentage acids are, what percent niacinamide is. The brand will disclose that. But for example, in the serum, you gave me tetrasodium glutamate diacetate. They're not going to disclose the percentage of that. It's a chelating agent. It helps stabilize the formula, prevent metals from interacting with the other components. Can also be a slight preservative. They're going to put that if it's below 1%, kind of wherever they feel like putting it. And in this case, it was listed at the end.
In this list of ingredients that I sent to you, it also says glycerin. There are different types of glycerin. There's is it one is vegan, one is not, or one is plant,
Yeah,
and one's petrochemical, or can
that's a
you?
great question. So just by looking at an ingredient list, it's impossible to tell where something came from because the ingredient list helps you identify the type of chemical it is. It doesn't tell you if it's natural, synthetic, or produced through biotechnology. In the case of glycerin, it can be plant-based. It could be animal-derived. Or it could be synthetically produced. And I would say in cosmetics, it's usually produced from plants. It's usually a byproduct of soy or corn or flax production. I retail a glycerin that comes from a non-food source. It comes from a weed in India because, I think it's important to not use food sources for ingredients if you don't have to, especially in countries where, food is an issue. But who knows where it comes from? And a lot of times brands will say, for example, salicylic acid. They'll say it's derived from willow bark, which is a plant. Well, in cosmetic products, salicylic acid is guaranteed to be synthetically produced. It's not coming from the tree, but there's no way to tell that looking at an ingredient list. You have to go through your supply chain and understand where all the sourcing comes from. Xanthan gum, not always vegan. So people will assume xanthan gum comes from a plant, but when it's processed, sometimes it may include animal-derived enzymes and that kind of stuff. So
the xanthan gum, excuse me for interrupting, but on the xanthan gum, that is something that keeps ingredients together, right?
It can be a thickener. It can help make a serum-like consistency. It can help improve the texture or modify the texture of a formula. And it can also help stabilize a formula. So if you have some separation, it may help stabilize it if you have an emulsion. It has really a lot of functions. And there's lots of different kinds of xanthan gum, depending on how it was processed from the producer. So even those aren't all created equal. And even as a cosmetic chemist, I have a very hard time looking at an ingredient list and knowing what xanthan gum they used. It's virtually impossible.
Oh, what brings that to mind is there's a product, and has been for years, that people will say it is only water, sugar, and lemon juice. But if you look on a container, on a container, a commercial for use, it says xanthan gum on it. So yeah. I thought, that is it as a stabilizer, but I always encourage, or I always discourage anybody that I'm teaching or mentoring don't mix this up at home, because then you are liable, because you've mixed something up at home in your kitchen. Do you have cats? Do you have dogs? Is it clean? Is it not clean?
Yeah.
Keep it in the refrigerator, and it's a hair remover,
Okay.
sugar
Yeah.
paste.
And, there may be preservatives in there that the brands isn't aware of or whatnot. So, I'll say most products are safe. Not everyone's getting it right. So unless you really know what you're doing, you're exactly right. Don't try to replicate something without an understanding of, okay, do I have all the pieces here? Is it preserved? Do I know how to produce something with what is called good manufacturing practices? Am I producing in a clean environment? Like I said, it's not easy. Manufacturing is very hard. I definitely have an appreciation for it after my corporate life.
Then there's another on that ingredient list that's denatured alcohol denate is what it says.
Yeah.
But because there's a difference in the alcohols. Can you touch on that? Because people say, oh, don't put alcohol on your face. And then some people will say, I only put alcohol on my face. And
Yeah.
is this isopropyl alcohol? Is it 70%, 91%? Can you touch on
Yeah. So
all things alcohol?
Yeah, so alcohol is a functional group in chemistry. It's when I see the word alcohol, I know that there's an oxygen and a hydrogen bonded together somewhere at the end of this molecule. And it gives it different properties based on what's going on. So, for example, in skincare, you may see isopropyl alcohol on an ingredient list. It's a very simple alcohol, it's a very tiny molecule, it's very lightweight, and it evaporates into the air as a volatile compound. And it may be in the product for different reasons. It may be intentionally added to help dissolve another ingredient. It may be intentionally added to make the formula very lightweight and evaporate from the skin. It may be added to help other ingredients get into the skin, or sometimes it's present as a byproduct. So when you use an ingredient, let's say I'm using an extract, okay?
Yeah.
You very rarely can buy passion flower fruit extract where it's not dissolved in another thing. So there's always like something that goes with it. And sometimes it may be isopropyl alcohol or ethanol or glycerin or caprylic capric triglyceride. It depends on how the extract was made and what compounds the manufacturer was trying to get out of it. So just because you see isopropyl alcohol doesn't mean it was intentionally added or that it's a bad thing for it to be in there. It has a purpose. So ask yourself, what's the purpose? How much is in here? It's usually not disclosed, but usually you can tell if the product is very drying or not. Sometimes isopropyl alcohol can be present, and there's other ingredients that counteract the negative impact it may have on skin. So people will say, oh, this product has drying alcohols in it. Isopropyl alcohol would be considered a drying alcohol. I don't want to use it. But there may be lots of humectants present, like glycerin and hyaluronic acid and erythrulose and whatever. So you can say, well, probably doesn't matter that it's in there, right? There's lots of goodies in there to combat the effects. So that's why you may see alcohol. In terms of the different types of alcohols, I mentioned that isopropyl alcohol is very small and it evaporates into the air. Ethanol is another one. Denatured alcohol is ethanol that has a chemical added to it, a denaturant, so that it's not drinkable, so that you can't drink your skincare product. It literally has a poison in it. It's safe for skin. It's very tiny amounts, but it makes it non-ingestible. This is primarily for tax purposes because alcohol is regulated very strictly in the United States. And so it's taxed, especially has lots of regulations. And so to circumvent all those regulations, you would use denatured alcohol in a product. And there's many types of denaturants. There's like dozens of them. And it depends on what type of product you're making determines the type of denatured alcohol that you're going to use. This is also a very tiny compound because it's ethanol. And so evaporates into the air. But then you might see things like cetyl alcohol on a label. And I've had people say that's an alcohol, I don't want to use it. But cetyl is big, it's not tiny. So cetyl alcohol is a very big compound and it's actually a waxy pellet. Doesn't feel like alcohol, doesn't smell like alcohol, doesn't evaporate like alcohol. And so it looks like alcohol on the label, but it has an entirely different purpose. And the word alcohol really just lets us chemists know what chemical structure it has. So it's not necessarily a determinant of function, but it's okay, what's the chemical structure? And so as a layperson, you read the label and say, alcohol, I don't want it. But that's where having a chemical understanding of what that compound is and what it's doing, and is it doing the things you don't want it to do? That's where having that knowledge is helpful.
That brings something to my mind now too, because I know of many people, not many people, I know that some people who make compounds, tinctures, herbal tinctures, use gin, maybe vodka too, but gin in it. So would gin, and you were talking about the taxing, so that is something that would be taxed, right? Differently on a raw ingredient. I don't know that it's called that, but and then if some product did happen to have that type of alcohol in it, I know years ago I had a client that was taking a medication that if they drank alcohol that they would get sick. I don't remember the name of it right now. And so they were very cautious on their intake form to make sure that there wasn't an alcohol anywhere in any of the products that would be what I call call a consumable alcohol that you could drink.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I will say that if someone's making their own tinctures using alcohol that's ingestible, I'm not aware that that's fully allowable in cosmetic products. I think usually it needs to
Okay.
be denatured alcohol or isopropyl alcohol, which you wouldn't use. If it is ethanol, when you purchase that material from a supplier, some of those financial and litigious aspects may already be wrapped up in the purchase and taken care of, and then you can use it. But any brand on a commercial scale is not going to use gin or Everclear, anything like that.
Okay.
They're going to buy extracts that are prepared commercially differently or in isopropyl alcohol or ethanol that's been denatured, something like that.
So
Um,
we as estheticians are not going to have to be concerned and read ingredient labels that may be, I've never been confronted with that again. And it was, they came for a while, and I don't know what
yeah,
happened with them,
well,
but I was very careful about what I put on their skin.
Well, from the manufacturing perspective, I think it's more, again, about politics and less safety.
Okay.
But from the safety issue for that individual, I mean, you always want to be careful because they're saying they have a medical condition and they can't have, something touching them, even if it literally makes no sense. Um, for example, it's controversial, but people who have celiacs, even the Celiac Foundation says using gluten topically is not an issue for a majority of people with celiac. So, you always want to still be careful because the guest is indicating they have an issue and you don't want to be liable should something happen, right? So in that case, you need to try to avoid any of the alcohols. But from a science case, I'm not aware that these alcohols are penetrating. Again, they're whether it's ethanol, which is ethyl alcohol, or specially denatured alcohol, or isopropyl alcohol. These are very volatile compounds, and they want to be in the air. They're not going to go enter the bloodstream that I'm aware of. So from a science perspective, you can relax a little bit, but then you always want to respect the guest, especially if they're indicating they have a medical concern.
Yes. Um,
And in that case, they should get a list from their doctor of topical alcohols to avoid. I would always say that.
oh,
Before you come in, I just need a list from your doctor so I can double check it. And then they should sign a waiver.
yes, yes. Well, that's an
Yeah.
excellent idea then. Okay. While we're talking about those types of things, there's a difference in witch hazel and isopropyl alcohol, right?
Yeah, so witch hazel is an extract and it can be extracted in alcohol, to my knowledge, but it's not alcohol on its own.
Okay, and fragrance. I want to touch on that before we
Oh,
ask our
sure.
final question.
Yeah.
The ingredients in fragrances do not have to be listed. It can just be listed as fragrance, and it can have many
Yeah.
ingredients, right?
Yeah. So fragrance is protected under trade secret laws. So you just have to list fragrance. And in certain geographies in the world, you're required to list any allergens present because fragrance materials can be allergenic as well. Some of the compounds can be. So from a safety perspective, though, I know people get really worked up that they can't see the fragrance list. But I always say, even if it were disclosed to you, how would it help you? How would it make you more knowledgeable? How would it make you feel more safe? Because you still wouldn't understand what those ingredients are present and doing, right? So I think there's something to be worried, to be said about that. From a safety perspective, fragrance compounds are, I think, some of the most studied compounds in the world from a safety perspective. And they're highly regulated in almost every geography. There's an international fragrance regulatory association called IFRA. It is an industry organization, but they have a lot of scientists, working with them for them to help establish globally recognized safety standards based on scientific data available. And these are the guidelines that cosmetic chemists or perfumers or even candle makers or laundry detergent makers will use when determining how a fragrance can be used. So with a fragrance compound, a blend that I get from a fragrance supplier, they give me a certificate with it, which tells me the percentage I'm allowed to use the fragrance at in a certain application and maintain safety. So for example, from a safety perspective, you can use this fragrance in a face cream at 5%. You're not allowed to use it in lip care, but you can use it in a candle at 100%. So they very specifically define how fragrance can be safely used and what percentages based on safety data, toxicological data, that kind of stuff. Because even though I'm a chemist, I wouldn't even be able to begin to look at the blends that they've used to determine, the safety profile of it. Also, I think it's an exaggeration when people assume every fragrance is a blend of hundreds or thousands of compounds. Literally, that would be like a chemist having to weigh out 1,000 items and add it to a little tank to create something. And I think that's few and far in between. I think, people are just blowing it out of proportion because they can, and it makes fragrances look really dangerous. But that's not really the case. That would be a very, very expensive fragrance. And the other good thing to note is that regulations are changing all the time as data becomes available, and they'll modify what level you're allowed to use things at, or if you can use things at all, what allergens you should be declaring. I know the list is getting updated with, instead of 26, now there's 82, that sort of thing. So it's an evolving industry. So I would say if you like fragrance and you're not aware that you have a sensitivity or an allergy, keep enjoying it and try not to stress out about it. The other big misconception I see is that people don't like synthetic fragrance. And all these retailers have restrictive lists on what level you can use synthetic fragrance at. I actually think synthetic fragrance is safer than natural fragrance, because when you have a natural compound, even a plant extract, you're extracting the whole plant. It's very difficult to control what comes out of it. And you'll often get many different compounds. And it's difficult for a toxicologist to know how safe the product is because there's all these compounds present in a natural fragrance extract. But a synthetic fragrance material is a pure compound. It's been synthesized in a lab. And so it's very easy to determine the safety of that kind of compound over a natural compound. So for me, synthetic is the safer choice, or equally as safe as a natural compound, if not safer, based on that alone.
This that last statement that you were making just brings to mind something that I tell clients because they'll say, what do you think about? And then fill in the blank. Cucumbers on your eyes, avocado on your face, you know, all of these home remedies. And I'll say, okay, well, what kind of cucumber is it? Is it a pickling cucumber? Is it a Chinese cucumber? Is it a salad cucumber? Where was it grown? Was it organic? What kind of weather was it in? What kind of soil was it grown in? All
Yeah.
of that makes up that cucumber that you want to stick on your eyes.
Yeah.
You know,
And you're not just getting the hydrating compounds, you're getting enzymes, you're getting proteins, you're getting who knows what else that's in it, not from a dangerous perspective, but even though it's a cucumber and it's safe to eat, not all these compounds are good for your skin or good when they're together. A toxicologist wouldn't be able to look at that cucumber and say, with certainty, it's safe when used in this way. They would probably have a lot of questions because there's a lot of stuff we don't know, we can't detect.
yes. Even cucumbers for salad, then I don't know, I learned a long time ago, you cut off both ends. I think it was in one of my college courses. You cut off both ends immediately because of the enzyme action and reaction. And some of the things like squash, then you soak it in a salt water to get rid of some of the enzymes, which, I don't know. There
Yeah.
are all kinds of things like that when people want to go into their refrigerator and uh, put the products on
And
their face.
sometimes it's not good, like even strawberries have a lot of
Ah,
protein in them that can cause issues on skin.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
Valerie George, cosmetic chemist, thank you so very much for being our guest today. And I just want our audience to know that this is part one. There's going to be a part two also. So when you're viewing this recording, then also look for the part two. Simply formulas, simply ingredients, the beauty brains. Now that there are links to all of those in the description, there will be. So that's how you can find Valerie. So we are going to close with our closing question because I've got notes here for next week. It's
Ooh,
like,
can't wait to
oh,
see.
I know. Ooh. Our closing question, Valerie, who or what was instrumental in you getting where you are today and not being on the show Happy Skin Over 50, but in your career, in your life of getting you here and what you're doing,
Yeah.
who or what was instrumental?
Yeah, I will say I wouldn't be here today without the mentors that I've had in my career. And no matter what you're doing, whether you're a cosmetic chemist or an esthetician or a financial analyst, no matter what field you're in or what you do or what your hobbies are, it's very important to have someone who can help guide you, someone that can be a sounding board for you, not someone that you can use and abuse, but someone who, really is there to support you as you grow. And without my two mentors, who one of them was just in cosmetic chemistry in general, Dr. Ron DeSalvo, he recently passed away, unfortunately. He was a huge mentor for me and just helping me critically think about ingredients and where they come from and how they're produced and having an appreciation that no matter what, every ingredient has a home. And then my second mentor, who trained me in hair color, because hair color is a science you have to learn from another person. You just can't pick up a book and make it like you can a lotion or anything like that. You have to learn it from another person. So I had a gentleman mentor me there, and I still keep in touch with him today. But having someone who can help guide you in the profession that you're doing, but also guide you professionally and how to grow in your field and be a leader and critically think, I think is very important, and someone that it's a safe space to go to. So I wouldn't be here today without those two gentlemen for sure. And I'm happy that I get to mentor other people as well. So it's very fulfilling and rewarding and not expecting anything in return.
Yeah. Thank
Yeah.
you so much. This has been very informational and very educational. And I'm looking forward to next week where we're going to follow up with this, but still kind of going in a different direction about how you can help people who may want to become a cosmetic chemist. Now, I never want to become a cosmetic chemist. That's not what I do. I'm an esthetician. But
Yeah.
for people who maybe that want to become a cosmetic chemist, or that is an esthetician that wants to produce products, of what you can do with your products that you sell, and your that business that you have. We're going to touch a lot and discuss a lot on that, plus a few other things. Okay.
Awesome. Looking forward to next week.
Yeah, I am too. And I want to thank everyone for joining us on Happy Skin Over 50.